Okay, well, thank you for everybody for joining us this morning. The purpose of this webinar is really educational and to help everybody understand the direction that the world is going in. And we've coined a phrase, object as a service. And I'd like to introduce you to Dave Birch. I know a lot of you will already know Dave.
Thanks very much, Terrie, and thanks very much for inviting me along to be here today. So yes, the idea is to open up the subject of object as a service, and I'll take you through why we think that is a category. So where do we start? Well, a little while back, about 3 years ago, in fact, Anne Cairns, executive at MasterCard, Anne said that wallets were going to be a thing of the past soon because of wearables. And what she meant by that was both what we might think of as active wearables, that's things like smartwatches and so on, that have their own batteries and their own power and things like that. And then you've got passive wearables, basically contactless devices. And Anne said that partly because of the cheapness and availability of these devices, wearables were going to take a chunk of that market. Now, in 2019, MasterCard wrote a very good report about this, and they said, this space is a space about fashion, not about technology. In other words, for this wearable business to grow and develop, it's essentially about fashion. So you shouldn't put people like me in charge of deciding what their thing should look like. You should put people who understand fashion in charge of it. And I think that's where it started to become more interesting. And I think that's roughly the same sort of time that Leanne became involved in this. And I just want to explain a little connection here, because Leanne and DIGISEQ actually all ran into each other at the Barclays Accelerator, which was back, when was that actually? I can't remember.
2016, I think it was.
Yeah. And is that when you started Everledger, Leanne?
I started in 2015, and then we met Terrie in 2016.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So just to give people a bit of the background, so Terrie and Colin had already set up DIGISEQ to start working in wearables at that point. But I was looking at a bunch of different blockchain startups, because you probably don't remember this, but it was very fashionable back in those days to blockchain startups. And I was looking, and they were all pretty much stupid. And then I ran into one that wasn't, which was Leanne and Everledger, and they blew me away. So just explain to people what Everledger was doing.
Yeah, look, in 2015, it was super early in the stage of blockchain, and I guess most people really associated Bitcoin with the new wave of technology. We saw the promise to be able to decouple the currency from the technology and apply the ledger to really opaque markets. So being from Australia and having a very solid and sustainable non-child labour-like environment of trade here, yet also looking at Leonardo DiCaprio's Blood Diamond movie, it still just sort of shook my head that the realities of that existed in the world outside of that magical bubble of Australia. And so when I saw the ability for technologies to be brought together, not just only track and trace technologies, but marrying that with blockchain and artificial intelligence, we applied it in the first instance to tracking diamonds, from the source of the mine right the way through to the retail network. And we knew and understood blood diamonds so pronounced because of Leonardo DiCaprio, but also parts of the story around the origin of an object is critically important. I'd come from track and trace technology since the mid-90s, so showing my age, Dave, now, but everything from tracking kangaroos to cattle here. And there was never really a global ledger that enabled us to make the connectivity happen. And so we brought together a symphony of technologies, and the rest is sort of history. Tracking diamonds and coloured gemstones, and working in the apparel space now, and then even far out to look and say, what could be potentially the most conflicted supply chain in the world by 2030 or 2050? And it's stored energy. So batteries, lithium and cobalt, and a number of nickel. All of these rare earths are really critically important for us to be able to understand where things are coming from.
Brilliant. So you can see what's building here. On the one hand, you've got people like Terrie who are coming in from the wearables direction. So here's an example, is Tovi Sorga. So Tovi Sorga do, very beautiful bracelets and jewelry and key rings and things like that. which thanks to Terrie and her team, you can load secure payment credentials into. And I want to sort of put that as a benchmark, because if you can load something secure enough to do payments, then you can do secure enough to do everything else. And so now through DIGISEQ, we can enable hats, badges, watches, I mean, you name it, but it's all gorgeous. So think about these still as two independent tracks that we're going to bring together in a minute. Earlier this year, I had the great good fortune to be invited to give a talk at the Women in Payments 2021. There was a fantastic presentation from Discover, who said passive wearables are the next contactless revolution. And this isn't just because people are going to use those kind of wearables as their main payment mechanism, but because of the flexibility, because what they're talking about is not just a key ring to go and pay down the shops, but wristbands for getting into concerts and sporting events, bracelets and passes, and things that mean something, bands that you can wear when you go to a beach resort so you can leave your phone and your watch locked up safely while you go swimming and pay. And I can see there are one or two people on the call who've been in that business in the past. And in the past, it's been a little bit problematic, because if you're going to get 20,000 EMV cards out to people going to a concert, personalizing all of those wristbands, in other words, making sure they're loaded with the right EMV card and it goes to the right person, that's quite a headache. So what's new? So one of the products that DIGISEQ have developed is the ability to load those secure credentials of any kind into these smart devices, but using your own phone. So instead of I phone up American Express and I order one of their fantastic Prada leather contactless bracelets, and then they personalize it for me. This is different. I walk into the shop, I pick up a bracelet, tag, watch, hat, whatever it is, and then I use my own phone to choose a card and load the card onto that device, and away I go. And I can load it and unload it and delete it and whatever. So now we have the ability to turn objects. There's an obvious caveat here, because those objects have to contain a chip which is smart enough to have the cryptography necessary to support these transactions. But fortunately, those chips, if you look at what's coming out of Infineon, for example, those chips are down at the sort of 40 to 50 cent level in reasonable volume now, and they're quite small. You can put them inside quite small things. So if you put these chips into objects, now you can use your phone to load secure credentials into those objects, and that is a pretty amazing opportunity for a new business. So what's the connection with Leanne, and why am I going so crazy about this stuff? One of the really big businesses, as Leanne has already given away my fantastic reveal by mentioning, is provenance. And the reason for that is that, putting it crudely, there are an awful lot of things in the world. And keeping track of all those things is rather complicated. And most of the time it doesn't matter. But when those things are, as I read in the paper this morning, when I was just having a cup of tea before I came in, I'm reading the newspaper and there's reports from Mexico of people paying $1,000 a go for fake COVID vaccine. For some things it does matter whether they're real or not. So I remember going to talk to a company about doing it for cigarettes, for example. And I remember looking at the use case of whiskey in South Korea. So they have a big problem with fake whiskey. And so they put the chips in the bottle caps, and you can scan it to see that it's, the real bottle of whiskey, and it came from this distributor and blah, blah, blah. And when you open it, it breaks the chip, so you can't reuse it. I mean, it's cute stuff, right? But as Leanne and other people found in the early days of trying to build this serious provenance business, using the blockchain as a backbone so that people couldn't tamper with it and change the evidence and so on, linking the thing in the block on the blockchain to the thing in the real world is complicated and time consuming and expensive. But chips give us a way of doing it which is mass market and affordable and effective. So I'm just going to ask Leanne to give us a little case study now of what happens when you put chips in things to chase the provenance.
A big piece of work we launched very early in 2020, the work with Alexander McQueen, or MCQ. We released about 150,000 garments last year through the midst of COVID, with a commitment of 3 million garments in production over the next number of years. Embedded within the brand itself is our label is woven with smart technologies, so smart chip technologies. The user can interact with that, and it knows exactly all of the materials and the supply chain, and not just only the materials, but actually the workforce, to ensure that the wages, the fairness in this stakeholder view is being taken seriously. Instead of putting the label on the back of the shirt or the jacket, it was actually placed prominently on the front of the jacket. So it's an entirely new way of interacting with the object. And allow the object itself to tell its truth about where it's come from. And marrying these two things together with Terrie gives us the ability to create an event type sequencing, and you're linking the identity of the person, the ownership of the object, and the origin of where it's come from. The real next empowerment piece is, where does this go after it leaves me? And who do I engage with? Now, we've seen huge rise of re-commerce, but it's the circular economy element that we think is critically important. So to reuse, repurpose, recycle, we know that's a really large trend, and the core brands themselves are starting to understand the importance of maintaining authenticity and integrity across the life of the object, not just the first time use. And now, for the first time, they're able to know access to consumers and consumer markets, which they were absolutely blind to before now.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've actually seen, and we did this in the awards environment, the Golden Globe, they were struggling with the fact that several of the globes were coming up on the internet for sale, being claimed that they were owned by Madonna or owned by Meryl Streep. There was absolutely no way to prove otherwise. So we did actually, embed a chip into the Golden Globe. And so now you can actually say on the night who it was actually handed over to and for what. And then it goes on from there, so that nobody can dispute or try to put up a £250,000 item on the internet and claim that it was given to Meryl Streep on that particular night. So it makes a huge difference.
And being able to interact with the object, whether it's a coat or a Golden Globe or anything else, through your phone is an absolute game changer. So the idea, I pop into the Oxfam shop. I wait around till I see Leanne leaving, then I nip into the Oxfam shop, get the Alexander McQueen, and when I scan it to see if it's real, it will tell me, yeah, this is real and it was bought with this person and so on. And presumably, it'll now be recorded on the blockchain that I've bought it. And this is where the tremendous long-term business opportunities arise, I think. And that's because, let's take it away from Alexander McQueen coats. Let's go back to the fake COVID vaccine, right? So I'm the doctor. I've got my phone. I scan the bottle of COVID vaccine, and the chip tells me, yep, this is absolutely kosher COVID vaccine, fresh out of the factory in, where is it, Belgium or something? I don't remember. But how do I know that they haven't just nicked the chips instead of nicking the vaccine, right? Because if I was a smart counterfeiter, this would be a godsend to me. Instead of having to spend all that money on making the bottles look realistic and getting the packaging exactly right, no, scrap that. As long as I can nick the chips and put the chips in, I'm home free. So reading the chip isn't good enough. It doesn't tell you anything, right? And there's another point to make here, which is that why should you be able to read the chip? If I wander into a bar and see Leanne, why should I be allowed to scan her coat? Now, of course, she can't stop me because it's just a tag, and it'll. So here's the thing: when I scan the vaccine or the coat or the bottle of whiskey or something else, it shouldn't tell me anything, right? GDPR, California privacy, blah, blah, blah. What it should tell me is where I can go to find stuff out, right? So I scan the coat and it tells me, DIGISEQ know what this is, right? Or someone, whoever's running the provenance scheme, right? Yes, we know what this is. And if you want to know more about it, you have to go and log in here, right? And then I can see, are you an employee of Alexander McQueen? Are you somebody who works in the shop? Are you someone who's rich enough they can do what the hell they like with any of our stuff anyway? Or have I never heard of you, in which case you're probably a burglar in Leanne's house going through her clothes to see what stuff's worth the most. So you see what I mean? The provenance business is not just taking an ID from the chip and going to the blockchain. It's much more than that. And frankly, it's much more interesting and exciting than that, because that security layer has to be so flexible to take us forward, right? I'm right, aren't I, Leanne? If it's just a question of everybody spying on everybody else, no one will use the stuff.
Yeah, look, it definitely is. And our chips don't disclose the private information. There's always public-private layering. But what is important for me is you'd make different purchasing decisions if you are able to access things in the supply chain. Like the manufacturing of that jacket is environmentally sound. I would make different decisions about the T-shirt I buy if I knew that it was 5,000 litres of water that's poisoning a near river versus spending an extra, $10 to make a different decision about the shirts that I buy. Fast fashion isn't going away, unfortunately, but this conscious consumer positioning is critically important. And we think that supply chains and retailers should really think about the types of data that they need to capture should actually be in a pre-competitive space. Still absolutely compete on price, but let's do a pre-competitive space when it comes to important data that's attributed around sustainability and the planet and everyone's thirst to run towards net zero.
I do get the sense that things are changing around that, aren't they? I mean, it is the idea that you might want to take into account a variety of factors, which would be different for different people. For some people, it might be energy use. For some people, it might be child labor. But the point is, we can't guess what people's buying decisions will be. But what we can do is give them full information to make their decision, right? Is that the goal?
You're exactly right. It's the decision economy, right? I mean, right now we are blinded. The information is available. There is nothing really that innovative around what Everledge has done. And I would even argue that blockchain is not new technology. It's combination of existing technologies that's come together in a novel way at a particular time in the world. We so desperately need the change. The biggest challenge, I think, in every business that's faced with the type of technologies Terrie and I arm wrestling to the ground is finding the alignment of value and value creation. And we were able to do that so succinctly well in the diamond industry. Not everyone is going to want to bear all, but transparency doesn't mean being naked to the entire world. It is actually that juggling and the attribution of data in a public-private sense is really where the underlying technology shines well.
And I think also the other thing from our perspective is that it's got to be doable by the consumer. It's got to be a sixth sense. They've got to be able to just go in and do what they need to do without having to feel constrained by this weird and wonderful technology. And I think that is the direction that we've come in from, that says there is this weird and wonderful technology, but don't be fazed by it. Don't be afraid of it. It's there for you to so simply use.
I hope we've got to the point where you can see now why we've got smart objects on the one hand and we've got the blockchain on the other hand, and these come together to create this provenance opportunity that we've never had before. It is a genuinely, and I don't say this lightly, but it is a genuinely transformational thing. And it isn't all to do with whether your T-shirt was made properly or not. It's also to do with whether the parts for your jet engine really do come from Boeing or off the back of a lorry somewhere. But let's start thinking where this sort of takes us forward a bit now. So we've tended to think about objects for payments, because that's a straightforward opportunity we have in front of all of us now. But in principle, we can now take any object that's got one of these chips in it and basically get it to do anything, because we have a payload of a few bytes that we can use to put pointers, links, and all this sort of thing. So give us a couple of examples of the things that you're doing, and ask Leanne to give us a couple of examples of the things that she's doing. And then perhaps we can sort of turn the conversation more towards the crazier stuff in the future.
My absolute favorite, and I think the owners of these are actually online, is I have a most beautiful charm that, would anybody guess that I use that for payment? No, I can whiz through the payment mechanism so quickly and people just stare at me as though I've come off of a different planet. And you would never, ever know that that is for payment.
That's cool.
So there are things like that that we use. And really the whole concept is that you don't need to spend £1,000 on a mobile to have contactless, easy to use wearable payment. It's all about starting at the £5 level with a very, very simple silicon, something very easy that suits festivals. We do those right the way through to one of the nicest ones that we do are like £50,000 bracelets. It's not one size suits all. This is fashion. Fashion is fickle. Fashion changes. It changes from day to day, year to year. So it's a constantly moving feast. And it's not like the cards industry where you've had one shape suits all for the last 50 years. This is exploding into an extremely fragmented and distributed type of environment. And to enable players who produce things in small amounts, like, for example, beautiful watch manufacturers, they're not going to be selling millions of them across the planet, but they still want the facilities. So it's really important that we enable them at the right level. So one watch manufacturer, for example, puts it in the glass.
It's really cool, you got to admit.
Yeah, really, really cool. And so our whole ethos is anything, anywhere, for anybody and any service. And I think one of the questions that came up was, do you think we'll reach a time when anything will be able to have payment or ID, credentials? And the answer is yes, it's becoming wholly possible. But it hasn't until the technology was turned into being able to distribute this information. And that's where we came in.
Leanne, how about you? I mean, you've put it in coats. So, I mean, what else have you been playing around with?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say our most exciting work is often the things that people don't see, and that's at the forensic layer. So we do a lot of work in, for example, resonant ultrasound, to be able to take the sound waves of a diamond and understand its unique signature. Work in multispectral AI. So under a camera, we're able to authenticate high-end luxury watches, knowing a counterfeit from an authentic. So, you know, identity is one piece around an object layer. We chose to start with diamonds for various business reasons and understanding the importance of it. But, you know, you spoke about privacy of data. Well, diamonds are dumb, firstly, and diamonds don't have rights. So we knew that when we were approaching this industry, we weren't going to be faced with GDPR because we are interested in the object itself. We're doing a fair bit of work in the nanotech space, which was really one of the breakthroughs of the work we did in emeralds. And we have about 30% of the global emerald market is now on Everledger. So we can immerse the emerald with a nanotracer and track that through the entirety of the supply chain. So this type of forensic view is really the work that we excel at. We're quite genius at it, to be honest. But what I think is really sort of transformational is how we then think about bringing together the next generation of technologies with that consumer interface. We're independent and we're a defensible line in terms of the brand and knowing the source of where things come from. And so that needs to stand up to the test of time. It might even need to stand up in a court if we have to prove, is this diamond real or is it synthetic by nature? Did it really come from this source? So we have to have scientific certainty around the provenance and the linking.
This is where it marries with the kind of more traditional security infrastructure. You know, because you've got to be able to resolve the certificate chain to see, did this virus come from the right machine? Was the machine authorized by the right person? Was that person, allowed to do this by the company? But these are things that can be resolved in milliseconds once you've got everything sorted out properly on the chain. So the ability to bring that kind of high security to play, not just for bits of jet engines or whatever, but for everything. is not that far off. But I just wanted to bring back one of your points, though. You said, well, the blockchain is nothing new and blah, 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 which is sort of true. But the point is, it's one thing for all of the data to be out there. It's another thing for the secure chips to make you confident about, the object. But actually, the blockchain does add something slightly different, because this point about the immutability is a real point. I can't bribe somebody to go back and change it to say that diamond came from a different mine, or this tuna fish came from a sustainable place when it didn't. And so there is a 2 + 2 = 5 about this, I think. And I am noted for being a blockchain skeptic, but this is one of the cases where it really does make a difference. Right, let's go to the chat and pick up a couple of questions from there. So what are your timescales on this, Terrie? So the iPhone and Android personalization works. Roughly when do you expect to see these devices starting to appear in the shops?
Probably towards the latter end of this year, beginning of next year, before they become fully commercialized. We're going through pilot right now. We expect to see the relevant chips out on the market sort of August-ish. And then obviously there is the process of manufacture, getting them in, and setting them up accordingly. So probably sort of more towards Q1 2022. Before it becomes fully commercialized in its fullest sense. And initially it will be payment, because that's payment is in your pocket, and that's what people want to actually make use of. And to me, the most important thing is really that it's being able to distribute this data securely, and initially being able to load it into the chip in the most relevant way. Because without that capability, you just haven't got the scale and the growth. So we recognize that has to be done going forward. And we're really excited to see that, a lot of our manufacturers are sort of almost chomping at the bit, and even the banks are saying, when is it, when is it, when is it? So that's an exciting place to be. You asked for one of the weirdest things. They're putting it into fingernail extensions.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
So you tap without actually holding anything. It's just embedded in yourself. I know that there is a company who would very much like to put it actually inside you, embedded as a module into you. But I think we've got some sort of real testing to do, medical testing.
I was begging them to do it, but they were whining on about insurance and liability.
Yes, yeah.
Look at Claire's question, just expand it a little bit. So with the cheap, we're talking about volume secure chips, like I say, down at that sort of 40p-ish level. Like, how much actual data can we store in those? Like Claire's saying, can you store keys in them as well? So when you've loaded in the encryption keys and blah, 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 how much have you got left over for URLs and pointers and other stuff?
You still have quite a bit left over, and as chips are getting bigger and bigger and cheaper, then you've got sufficient space to keep at least a small record. And as you say, you don't want to keep heaps of data, because you don't want somebody to be able to see heaps of data about a particular device. But what you can do is you can keep enough to point to locations where you can find information about that device.
Can I just push you a little harder about the future? Because I am genuinely curious what you guys think about where this stuff is going, because I can literally see these chips being inside everything. I mean, they're getting to the price point now where you can imagine them going into basically everything. I mean, wine bottles, canvases for artwork, and packets of cigarettes, all the stuff we've talked about.
From my perspective, I think they just are going to go into pretty much anything and everything that has any value to anybody, be that the manufacturer or be that the consumer themselves, wherever the value is. And, I mean, crazy things, just you don't want your fireman wearing a jacket that is not fireproof. How do you guarantee that what they're buying is the right stuff? And so it goes across the board. And I just don't think it'll stop. I mean, there's something like 41 billion devices out there. And I wouldn't say 100% of them are worth having a chip in to give them the identity. But if you said, sort of 75% of them will be worth it, because that is what will keep, as Leanne said, the planet going. And it's all a matter of what's it worth to anybody.
Leanne, you've built a fantastic business out of Ever. I cannot tell you how much I admire it. Where are you going next?
Look, we have a fundamental belief that we're at an inflection point of moving from what we once knew was the World Wide Web to the World Wide Ledger, that security paradigms are going to become completely distributed and decentralized. And the consciousness of consumers and supply chains are now going to run across the world, and will start to change the way global trade works. That's already started with geopolitical positioning, but we do know and we can see that some governments are actively asking significant questions around more than just trade relations. What are we doing on the impact? So the impact of planet, the impact of people, that is an appetite of the millennials. We've seen that, but now we're actually seeing policy embedded. And we believe that the next generation of the internet needs an ethical trade platform, that the large companies that exist today, of the SAPs and the Arebas of the world and Navision and Microsoft, are asleep at the wheel. They're the incumbents, and entirely new value systems are going to be created by we're able to bring together that stakeholder view. And we think we're in the right place at the right time to make that happen.
And I think, from our perspective, that's where we're looking as well, because we're creating that network of connectivity for that distribution. It will take its time. Nothing, Rome wasn't built in a day, but the whole concept is there for that distribution. So having a network rather than, a peer-to-peer communication going on.
Terrie, finish up by telling us a little bit about DIGISEQ, where you are in the cycle of things, and what kind of investment you're looking for at the moment.
Oh, well, from DIGISEQ's perspective, we've got to the point where we have a commercial system running. We have the beginnings and actually a very solid platform of commercially running the ability to deliver different services into different objects with, in excess of 20 banks connected, in excess of 300 different devices being used, in thousands going out there. We're now moving into that next stage where we do recognize the distribution requirements for provenance and everything that we've spoken about today, the ability to get the data into the chip at the right time, for the right reason, at the right point. So now we are moving into looking at scaling our company to achieve that. So that's where we've got to a commercial platform that is now scaling, and we're very excited about moving that forward and working with Leanne going forward to really bring the platforms together.
That's fantastic. Listen, Terrie, thank you very much. I know you guys are really busy today and you have a lot on your plate, so thanks for making the time. Leanne, I hope we didn't keep you up too late. It was fabulous to hear from you as always, and I genuinely can't wait until we can actually meet up for a drink again sometime. So thanks again, I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that's dropped in to listen to this. Feel free to drop a note to Terrie or me or Leanne if you've got any questions, and we look forward to talking to all of you again soon. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thanks, Leanne, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.